Welcome back to the Monday Morning Point Guard podcast. On today's episode, going to be discussing Jabari Smith as a potential number one pick and draft prospect. What are his strengths and weaknesses, and what role do I see him filling in the NBA? If you did enjoy the video, please be sure to like it as well as subscribe for weekly content. Also, the podcasts are now up on Spotify, so you can listen to the full episode uninterrupted there. And if there's a spot you agree with, disagree with, either reach out to us on Twitter or in that comment section, and we'd love to discuss with you. Outside of Chet, the other player I've seen tossed around as a potential number one pick has been Jabari Smith. And while I've seen more Chet news as far as being the number one overall pick, Jabari Smith has been a close second. And Jabari, unlike Chet, is a player that we've seen come through the league a handful of times. And again, unlike Chet, it's very easy to imagine a role for him in the NBA. Last week with Chet, I mentioned him being the ultimate low floor, high ceiling guy, a guy you could convince me of being an all NBA caliber player, a bust, or anything in between. Jabari Smith isn't that. If someone put a gun to my head and said, you have to pick a player from this year's draft who's going to be a starter for the next 10 years, it would be Jabari Smith. That's not to say that Jabari doesn't have a high ceiling, because he absolutely does. It just doesn't go quite as high as Chet Holmgren, but the floor of what he is much, much higher. So let's go through some of the strengths, some of the weaknesses, as well as what type of role I see for Jabari in the league. But first, what is Jabari Smith as a player? Well, at Auburn, he was a 6'10", 210-pound freshman power forward with a 7-foot wingspan who averaged 17 and 7 on 43% field goals and 42% threes. He also shot 80% at the free throw line. As a player, he's a true three-level scorer who's very versatile and capable on the defensive end. Jabari Smith, as a player, breads his butter shooting the basketball. Obviously, shooting 40+% on threes is no small feat, and it's not as if teams were just leaving him alone on the perimeter. Quite the opposite. In fact, Smith just has a truly beautiful jump shot. Shooting threes looks as natural as breathing to him, and when you combine that with his height, a quick release, and the high release point he has on his jump shot, it just isn't going to matter in a lot of cases whether he's contested or not. That smooth like butter three-point shot also extends well beyond that three-point line. Jabari Smith can hit turnarounds out of the post or pull up in the mid-range. He can really just rise up over the top and get the jumper off at any place on the court. He isn't just a sharpshooter, though. Smith is a really gifted athlete who can get into the paint and finish strong around the rim with either a thunderous dunk, and he also has a soft enough touch to lay the ball in the basket when he's in traffic. Smith also runs the floor like a gazelle. He's capable of crashing to the basket on the break, or he can act as the trailer and spot up for a three. When I said Smith was a three-level scorer, I wasn't joking. Jabari Smith is really just a threat to score at any time, any place, and in any situation. He really just is a scoring machine who's capable of being your main source of offense at the next level in terms of scoring. A guy you can run sets for, or he can be the type of guy who can bail you out of broken possessions. Smith is also just one of those scorers who seems to disappear at times. And while that sounds like a negative, I don't mean it in that way. It's more so he blends into the flow of the game. He's the type of guy where you might feel like he hasn't done much or you've been defending him well, but then when you look up at the end of the game, he's put 25 or 30 on you. Smith defensively really gives a crap. And that's not a given for young players. And when you combine that with his athletic ability and really solid instincts, you have a really versatile defender and a switchable defender who's perfect for this modern era of basketball. On the ball, he's shown flashes of being a lockdown type defensive player. And off the ball, he doesn't lose focus like so many young players can. He remains engaged and flies around and provides great help defense. So don't be surprised if at some point in his NBA career, he finds his way onto some all defensive teams. Even if he never fully taps onto that on-ball lockdown potential that he has, at the next level, at the very least, he's going to be a really solid team defender. As for the negatives and his weaknesses, they're far less apparent and obvious when you compare him to Chet Holmgren. The one that stands out the most for Jabari Smith and concerns me the most is the fact that he has almost no aptitude for playmaking and would likely make a very poor offensive initiator at the next level. Even on the fast break, it's very clear that Jabari Smith just isn't comfortable dribbling the ball. It looks clunky, it looks awkward, and he's somewhat out of control. His dribbling just also has very little wiggle, very little shake. It's really for him just a means for getting from point A to point B rather than for him to get the defense off balance or work himself into a position where he has an advantage. He almost stands like completely upright when he's dribbling the ball. So if a team has ambitions of him becoming the lead offensive initiator, he's really going to have to tighten up the handle and develop some go-to moves. Outside of the ball handling part of playmaking, he also has very little passing feel. He can be a ball stopper at times, holding the ball onto the ball slightly longer than you would want, and he could get some tunnel vision when he's looking for his scoring opportunities. He can typically beat his man just fine, but he's shown some real struggles at reading and reacting to the next level of defenders or just finding the open man. He just doesn't have natural feel as a playmaker, as either a ball handler or a passer. And it's not inconceivable that he could develop that with time, but of the guys being considered for the number one overall pick, he's got the furthest way to go as that. For me, it's much more likely that he just never develops those skills, since it isn't just a matter of him cleaning it up or improving in certain areas. He's basically going to have to be building the playmaking aspect to his game from scratch. But I guess if I were feeling optimistic about his future as a playmaker, maybe the ball handling is really what's holding him up. It's so rough, and it just doesn't appear second nature to him. So it's taking away focus from other areas. And maybe that's why he's missing open teammates. So if he got the handle to a place where it becomes second nature to him, maybe his ability to read defenses would improve as well. I've also seen some concerns about his shot selection and ability to create space or create his own looks, and I'm less concerned about either of those things. When it comes to his shot selection and even the ball stopping that I previously mentioned, a lot of that can be attributed to the team he played with at Auburn. The guards he played with were about as ill-suited to showcase Jabari Smith as any you could have found at the Division I level. They just couldn't read the temperature of the room and seemed to forget who the best players on the team were. And Jabari Smith would go long stretches of games without getting the ball when the Auburn guards decided to just go rogue and do their own thing. So it's likely whenever he did get the ball, when they were doing that, he was just bound and determined to make the most of it. He doesn't strike me as a selfish player. So if he had played with guards who were more willing to set him up and just more willing to move the ball in general, I think you would have seen far less of those bad shots and ball stopping moments. As far as the shot creating / space creating piece, I'm even less concerned about that. It's really hard for me to kill a guy for not doing something that he's never had to do. And would it have really been better for Jabari, or for me, would I have felt better about it if he was just taking step backs for no reason? And just in general, would it have been better for Jabari Smith if he was taking lower quality shots just for the sake of impressing NBA scouts? I really don't think so. He's been able to rise up over the top and just in general out athletic basically any matchup he's ever had at this stage in his life. And while that will somewhat change at the NBA level, he's still 6'10" with a silky smooth and quick release. So he's likely going to be able to rise up over the top, even at the NBA level in most matchups. I still think he's going to be a scoring machine at the next level. And he likely hasn't shown us the full repertoire just because he's never had to. The only negative defensively I can point to, and I really hesitate to even call it that, is the fact that Jabari isn't really a rim protector. That's likely going to rule him out as a stretch five in the league, but it's not unlikely that he's going to be able to at least add some rim protection to his game. He has a plus wingspan. He's a good athlete. He has good instincts just in general on defense. And also it looks like that he has a frame that we could see him bulking up and adding some serious strength. Also, in college, he was never really asked to do that. He played alongside an elite shot blocker. So that's likely going to be where his role is going to fall in the NBA. But he might have more rim protection to his game than we've seen just because he's not been asked to do it. But even if he never develops into an elite shot blocker, I think he's going to be likely enough of a presence around the rim to hold it down as a small ball five in spots. Unless you're going up against an elite center like a Joel Embiid, you might even be able to get away with it at this stage in his career. Comps wise, offensively, I've heard some Rashard Lewis, even some Kevin Durant. The Rashard Lewis piece of that I totally agree with. But Kevin Durant, I just don't see it. I guess shooting wise, the reason for the Durant comparison is that, like Durant, Jabari tends to just rise up over the top of defenders for the jump shot. So that might be what's lending that comparison. But play style wise, I just don't see it between Durant and Jabari. The Rashard Lewis thing is pretty spot on. For those who are too young or just don't remember Rashard Lewis, he was really ahead of his time as a 6'10" small forward / power forward. He spent the bulk of his years with Ray Allen in Seattle as his running mate. And just in general, I felt like he really flew under the radar for most of his career, but he started to kind of become a household name as part of that Orlando team that made it to the finals with Dwight Howard. The reason I say he was ahead of his time is because back when he played, teams really didn't run stretch fours. Sure, you had guys like Dirk Nowitzki, but Dirk was more of a post player who happened to be able to shoot threes, whereas Lewis was definitely a more perimeter-oriented scorer, and Orlando just happened to put him at power forward. It's something that's pretty much a staple in today's league, but back in Lewis's heyday, it was certainly not. And Rashard, like Jabari, while able to create his own looks, was really never a player who was going to be able to create shots for others. Also for Jabari, there are some shades of Carmelo Anthony, at least with respect to the mid-range package. Jabari in the mid-range likes to go to this series of jab steps followed by a 1 or 2 dribble move into the pull-up. That's something we've seen Carmelo Anthony basically make an entire career out of. Michael Beasley is the last comp I want to mention, and it was the first one that popped into my mind when I saw Jabari Smith play. And while that might seem like a huge insult, Michael Beasley was a super athletic scoring machine at Kansas State. He was talked about as the next Kevin Durant and was seen as a future superstar in the league. All the potential was there for Beasley, but with him, he had 2 major issues that aren't going to likely apply to Jabari. Beasley had some off-the-court stuff, mainly partying, running with the wrong crowd, things like that. And that was, of course, amplified when he was drafted to Miami. But also for Beasley, he played no defense. I mean, absolutely none. He was like a borderline disengaged James Harden level as a defender. And neither of those issues are going to apply to Jabari. So if Beasley had cleaned up those 2 parts of his game, I think he would have been a really solid player in the league. And Beasley, like Jabari, wasn't a natural playmaker or a great ball handler, but it didn't matter just because he was such a great scorer. Beasley was a 3-level scorer, athletic finisher around the basket. He was also a really great shooter, but I actually feel like Jabari Smith is further along in the shooting department. He has the mechanically superior shot. It looks more pure. It's faster. It has a higher release point than anything Michael Beasley had. Role-wise, I mentioned last week, if you take Chet Holmgren number 1, you would likely have to engineer a role basically unto his own from scratch because there just wasn't a template within the current archetypes we have in the league for Chet. This is not the case with Jabari Smith, and there is room for a player like him on every roster in the league. Even in the worst case scenario where he doesn't improve at all from the player he is today, he's likely still playing major minutes for most teams as a stretch 4. Space the floor and play defense. Those are 2 of the biggest needs in the league, and he can do both right out of the box. But it's likely he's going to be so much more, and it's almost easier to talk about what you don't want Jabari Smith doing in terms of a role as opposed to what you do, just because of how versatile he is. It's really important for Jabari that you don't run him as a point forward. He just doesn't have the skill set for it. The Knicks do this with Julius Randle, and it just isn't working out. And I would argue that Randle is a much better ball handler, a much better passer than Jabari Smith is. And we've seen how that has really affected Julius Randle's play. So With less of a skill set, I think it would be bordering disaster for Jabari Smith for him to be the offensive initiator. Outside of just spotting up to space the floor for others, you can also run Jabari Smith as a roll man in either a dive to the basket or a pick and pop to either the mid-range or the three-point line. He's athletic enough to crash to the hoop, and he's skilled enough to either shoot the mid-range or the three-point shot. Also, if he gets a favorable matchup, you can just post him up. Jabari Smith has a really nice turnaround out of the post that is absolutely unguardable if he has a height advantage. I think it's really important that you get Jabari Smith moving off ball. The guys who are going to be big enough to guard him aren't going to likely want to chase him around all game. And despite where I said he's kind of a clunky dribbler and kind of has trouble moving in those spaces, he's an extremely fluid athlete who's going to have no trouble running around and moving around the court. After getting him the ball, I think it's important that you get him his touches in space with his side of the floor cleared. One-on-one, he's borderline unguardable. So if you create situations where it isn't as important for him to read help side defense, where he can just make like a one or two dribble move, just a quick move, similar to the way that Carmelo Anthony was used during his prime, that would be ideal for him. You want him to get a lot of touches, but I don't want him to have the ball for very long on his touches. The quicker, the better, get it in and out of his hands, but he should be touching the ball a lot. As for the players you're going to need to have around Jabari Smith, I think above all else, you need a good playmaker, someone who can initiate the offense and do the bulk of the playmaking and creating. Jabari Smith as a player will really be best playing off of others and having others set up his scoring opportunities. He's an excellent finisher to a possession, but he's likely never going to be the guy who's going to be able to set it all up. He's sort of like a great wide receiver, like a Randy Moss or a Tyreek Hill. Sure, if you have an average to below average quarterback, they're still going to be really good, running shorter routes like slants and drags, but where they're truly unlocked as players is when you have a quarterback who can get them the ball down the field. The better the guy you have setting the table for Jabari Smith, the better Jabari is going to be. And outside of that, just having a great rim protector is going to go a long way. If you add Jabari Smith to a situation with at least serviceable defenders and a real rim protector at the center spot, that has the makings of an elite defensive team. Even if everyone else on your team is a total liability defensively outside of your shot blocking center, if you add Jabari Smith to that mix, that's at least getting you to the middle of the pack in terms of where you're ranked in the league defensively. And while Jabari Smith isn't as complete a basketball player as Chet Holmgren, who I covered last week, Jabari is excellent at the two things that really matter, defense and scoring. His floor is much higher than the other two players being considered for the top three. And while the role he can play for a team isn't as flexible as someone like Chet Holmgren, every team in the league can easily fit in a player with the skill set of a Jabari Smith, a versatile, switchable defender who is capable of being your leading scorer.